Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Jessica Strawser. Jessica is the author of the book club favorites, Almost Missed You, a Barnes & Noble best new fiction pick, not that I could tell, a book of the month bestseller, Forget You Know Me, awarded a starred review by Publishers Weekly, A Million Reasons Why, called a standout in a starred Booklist review, and named to most anticipated lists from Goodreads, SheReads, Frolic, E-News, and others. And the next thing you know, a People magazine pick for Best New Novel, now new in paperback. Jessica is editor-at-large for Writer's Digest magazine, where she served as editorial director for nearly a decade and a contributing editor at Career Authors. A Pittsburgh native and outstanding senior graduate of Ohio University's E.W. Scripps School of Journalism, she counts her New York Times Modern Love essay and her Writer's Digest cover interviews with such luminaries as Alice Walker, Ann Tyler, and David Sedaris among her career highlights. She lives with her husband and 2 children in Cincinnati, Ohio. Welcome, Jessica.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So
I'm sorry
glad to
my
have
bio
you.
is so long. I feel like I should have cut that down.
No, there's so much to say. You're, and actually, I did trim out a few things. I was like, wow, we could just do your bio and talk all day about all your accomplishments. So that's amazing. And Jessica and I talked a little bit ahead of the podcast about the fact that we both lived in Cincinnati, but I was there before she got there. So it's a beautiful place, and the book is set there. So let's talk about The Last Caretaker, which I loved. It's such a beautiful cover. Can you tell us about the book?
Thank you so much. Yes, The Last Caretaker is about a woman who's looking to start over after her divorce, and a friend hooks her up with this job as a resident caretaker on a nature reserve. So she's signing up to be the lone resident on 900 acres of forest and old farmland. And to be honest, she's not really a nature person. She doesn't know if she's well suited to kind of take this on, but it's a pretty sweet gig. It comes with a fully furnished farmhouse, and so she figures she'll just fake it until she makes it. And what she's not expecting is for an injured, frantic woman to show up on her doorstep in the middle of the night, in the middle of the nowhere, on her very first night in the job. And this woman is clearly expecting a safe place to hide. And it becomes obvious pretty quickly that this house is harboring a safe house for women on the run from abusive husbands and boyfriends, and it's being used by some sort of grassroots network, but nobody told her that this was part of the job. So she really has to kind of piece together what's going on and make a really big decision about whether she wants to step into this role. And of course, she starts wondering why this job was open in the first place, because no one seems to be able to tell her exactly what happened to the last caretaker.
Yes, the last caretaker, Grace, is missing, and that is really scary. There's a lot of, and it's a beautiful house, but it's kind of it's a creepy older house, and there are some people around that are a little bit, she doesn't know whether to trust them, but it's her best friend from college, Beth, who is, there on site with her, or on, in the area with her family, and Katie leaves has left a long marriage with a he's not a evil man, but not a very nice man either. So she really is kind of all on her own, which is so intimidating, and I can understand her position. So you talk a little bit about the inspiration for the book in your acknowledgments, but can you just share that with our audience?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a few different levels to how I got the idea, which is kind of how it always is for me. I do not have this file of like fully formed novel ideas, but I'll have these like random things that I think I might write about one day, and then if you're lucky, some magic happens and they come together and make sense all of a sudden. So very literally, I was on a hike one day. There is a property a lot like this nature reserve that exists here in Cincinnati. And I fictionalized it for the book, obviously. There's some sort of nefarious things going on in the book. So I didn't want to, there is an actual caretaker at this property. So I did not want to put her or him. I don't know who this person is. I've never spoken to them in the hot seat in any way. But, like the property in the book, just if we talk as not only as writers, but as women.
Yeah.
I like to do a lot of my brainstorming alone on a hike. I think really well. As a woman, I have to be careful about where I go alone on a hike. And there is this place in Cincinnati called the Cincinnati Nature Center, where you have to be a member to hike there. And there's like an admission booth that you have to scan through to go in. And that sounds very elitist, but it's actually super affordable. I mean, I think it's like $45 for the entire year. So it's not, and you get a lot of programming, and they do ecological research and things like that. So I just like going there because I feel safer. Someone's keeping track of who's coming in and out. And I figure if someone's going to mess with a hiker on a trail or break into cars in a parking lot, they're probably going to do it in a public park. It just seems like a little too much work to have to go to get behind a gate. So I feel a little bit safer. And they have this annex property that is outside of the main nature center that's much farther out in the country. And it's sort of a best kept secret. Not as many people go there, and it is not staffed. It doesn't have the visitor center and the preschool and the high traffic that the main nature center gets. And there is a caretaker who lives there. And every time I go there, I would see the house through the woods and think, how interesting to live out here alone. And then I don't know if you remember reading this viral essay a few years ago. There was this woman who like bought a remote cabin for a sort of like semi-permanent writing retreat and absolutely hated it and wrote this essay about like how this seemed like a good idea and very picturesque, and she hated it. And it went viral because I think people really related. So I always kind of have that debate in my own mind when I'm out there, like, this seems really cool to have all of this to yourself, but would it be, or is it one of those things that sounds cool, but it's actually not? Just even the practicalities, like there's no way you could order a pizza out there, you're behind like a guard shack and a gate, and you need a card to get in. So this one day I was looking for I was brainstorming some ideas. I went for a hike. It was like a blustery day in November, and I was literally the only person there. I had the entire place to myself, unless the caretaker was there. I don't know if they were, but I'm thinking about the caretaker, and I'm thinking about how it feels to be here all by myself and how I feel safe, but maybe it's a safe sense of security. Maybe it's a false sense of security, And then in my head, I started flipping it around and thinking, what if this was empowering? What if this was your domain and you had the right attitude where you could do whatever you want out there? No one's paying attention. Hardly anybody's there, especially in the off season on a blustery day. No one's coming through very often. And the idea of someone having that attitude, but then using it for good to help the more vulnerable people. And so just in a very base, like structuring of the story, by the time I got done with that hike, I had the idea for the story. I had also been thinking about what I'm sure you're referring to for my authors now. I had also been thinking about possibly writing another novel that touched on domestic violence. It's kind of my soapbox. I had written a novel called Not That I Could Tell in 2018.
Beautiful, yeah.
That used a little bit of domestic, that had to do a little bit with a woman disappears after a backyard fire pit with her neighbors, and they were the last people to see her, and her husband falls under suspicion, of course, as always happens. And the neighbors start to wonder what was going on behind closed doors. So it's really, as with The Last Caretaker, there's not a direct like point of view from the victim or their abuser, but more of like this bystander point of view. And I had written that novel because I had lost a friend to domestic violence, and I ended up doing a lot of volunteer work and learning about it and things like that. And I think that novel kind of addressed some of the questions that were still bothering me that I didn't know the answers to, like what should you do if you think your friend is in trouble? And what happened after I published Not That I Could Tell, which was very successful. It was a book of the month selection, and it's probably still my most popular novel. It's probably the novel I still get the most reader mail about. What happened was I started meeting readers who had their own stories that were just, I mean, I had written it because I knew that this was more common than anybody wants to think about. Then I found out that it really is more common.
Of course.
I was literally at a book club meeting, like in this very affluent neighborhood near my home, with a group of neighborhood women who were telling me that they had hidden one of them from her own husband a few years before, hidden her in this house for like a month or something like that. So I think all of that really kind of inspired me. I think the capacity that women have to, help one another and the things people are willing to do for each other can be pretty remarkable. So I had been also thinking about writing some kind of novel that dealt with those aspects of things. And then when I had sort of the literal idea for the setting, it just kind of all came together in my brain.
And it's so interesting. So, Katie, of course, as you said, doesn't know, she doesn't know what is going on, but her instinct when this woman shows up is very much to be like, okay, what do we do? Because I think that is none of us, and I think it's true for men probably too, or at least, the men that we love that are not the predators, shall we say.
Right.
We acknowledge the fact that there are so many women. The statistics are really alarming. How many women have been, they're either victimized physically or emotionally, or and because of the nature of so many marriages where the woman ends up being the caretaker in a different way than this caretaker, they become subjugated by their spouses, partners, husbands, because they have less power, right? They have less financial independence. They have less, they're seen less in the world because we're behind our children at school. We're behind our, we're sort of in the background versus being like, the breadwinners and the forefront. And so we end up being victims and not having, and being, sort of the idea of being trapped. And what does happen often as in these situations is that these women are separated from their communities, right? The husband manages to sort of destroy the relationships that she might have with her family and her friends until she's so isolated that there really is nowhere to turn. So I love the idea of like, how do we show up for each other? Like, what is our responsibility when we know someone is in danger, right? What do we do? Like, so if we suspect something,
exactly. And I think also this is there's so many different factors at play here, and I am by no means an expert on this topic, but I do find it is very real, and I find it endlessly fascinating. I think it's something where we've all seen all the headlines on the news. We all know that the system has a lot of shortcomings with how we deal with these situations. How many times does a woman killed by an abusive spouse or an ex who she had restraining orders against, they did nothing? How many Dateline episodes have we seen where they're interviewing all family and friends and they're all saying, we were so afraid something like this was going to happen, even when, and there aren't always all those red flags, but even when there are, the system is obviously inadequate. So I feel like this is a topic where people sort of intrinsically understand that a little grassroots effort might be necessary. And there are whisper networks like this. Mm-hmm. But even if you go through, the appropriate channels, for instance, I've done some volunteer work with our local YWCA here in Cincinnati. If you were to call their hotline and you need a safe shelter, you need to go to even the actual women's shelter that they run. there's not a street address that they give out. It's very covert directions. I mean, I've gotten it's go until you see this thing, turn left, turn right.
Mm-hmm.
Go there, and there's panic buttons installed on the property. They've had employees assaulted in the parking lot. They've had, it's not necessarily somewhere that you feel safe, but even through the proper channels, some of this is happening in a kind of a very covert, honor system type of way, where if you're volunteering or you're helping, they're really putting trust in you to not broadcast the location of people in this place. And so it's just kind of ripe for, it's good dramatic potential in real life.
God. Yeah. I mean, exactly. And I think, but it is interesting because, of course, in many ways, we read of so much about how the system fails, and the idea of a restraining order is so interesting, right? It's the idea that a piece of paper would prevent somebody from getting within however much distance, and yet, like, yeah, what is that really?
You don't even have gun laws in place to stop that person from obtaining like an arsenal of weapons.
Right.
So but certainly a piece of paper is not going to keep them. Yeah.
Exactly. And we have to enter into the sort of the rampant mental illness that is, so prevalent in our community, right? So we have you have somebody who's mentally unstable and they're supposed to abide by a restraining order. Of course, it's just, and it is so complicated. Let's talk about shame, because I think that one of the biggest issues, and maybe this is our opportunity to sort of out this, there's so much shame involved in acknowledging that you are a victim, right? I get shivers just talking about it, right? Like, there's the shame of like, how did I get myself into this position? Why can't I get myself out of this position? As though if you are that woman, you really could do something about it, right? I mean, so many times it's our children are held against these women, and I mean, they have no financial resources. They may not even have like access to physical transportation out of the situation, and yet still there's this idea, and this is the same as Me Too. We shame the victims by being like, well, what were you, right? What were you doing at that place? Like, what were you doing, on a street at night? What were you wearing? Right. Like, right.
As
though, yeah.
Totally. And that you've actually hit on the exact reason that I think I ended up writing another book that touches on this, because when I wrote Not That I Could Tell, I know if you've been like, do you think you'll ever write another like domestic suspense that deals with domestic violence? I would have said no. Like, I said what I had to say. And also, these are not, I want to be really clear, this is a serious issue, and I obviously have personal reasons for writing about it, but I also want to be clear, these are not like issue books. Like, you want to read a deep book about domestic violence.
No.
Like, this is, I think I've always thought, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. And it happens to be, I hope, an entertaining story that has that in it and gave you something to think about. But it's not, it's very much not like, read this depressing slog through.
No, it's so captivating. And yet it does leave you thinking. And that's the kind of book I love, because there's so many people you're rooting for. You understand Katie's dilemma. Like, she's just getting out of this sort of messy situation. She's got her sister's kids coming to spend the summer. And she's in, and it's that if you're involved in this whisper network, there's danger to you.
There could be, right. But I think, getting back before we move on to that, getting back to what you were saying about the shame, that was my like long disclaimer.
Yeah.
But what you were saying about the shame, that is the whole reason to me to write about this, and to write a contemporary fiction suspenseful story that has to do with it. Because what happens is, and what I saw after Not That I Could Tell, I'm in living rooms, I'm in libraries, I'm in women's groups, and all of a sudden everybody's talking about it.
Right.
And that is how you break down the stigma, right? Because the more that anybody finding themselves in any kind of abusive situation, their instinct is to feel ashamed and to sweep it under the rug. The shame ends up falling on the wrong person. A lot of times people don't even know that this guy is, not a good guy. And all of a sudden people are talking about it. And yes, we start out talking about the novel. Everybody ends up sharing their own stories. And those are the conversations that when everybody goes home that night and thinks, gosh, we had a real conversation about a real issue. So-and-so knows someone who went through something. I know someone who went through something.
Yeah.
Else knows. And then you realize, holy, how common it is. And the more you can get those conversations out in the open, in my mind, that is literally the only way that I can think of to break down the stigma. And a lot of
I think
times,
it's the only way.
And I think it's important. And also, it is frustrating to have done so much, like reading up on something and work and learning about something, and to really sort of the takeaway is still, oh my gosh, the best way out of this is to never have met this guy in the first place. There is not a good, once you, it's just, to me, it feels like such a hopeless situation. And if I can write a story that makes it feel a little less hopeless for even one person, then
well, I agree. I mean, to your point, and I dug right into the issue of like the women's part of it, because of course this is what I love to do the most. But I think but I think the and this is true of books, lots of books I've read, like Ashley Winstead's The Last Housewife. I mean, these are books that you read for the book. I mean, it is like it's a compelling story. Katie, the main character, is amazing. Her best friend Bess is amazing. Her sister and the difficulties of her relationships, her ex-husband, and the difficulties with him, and all the layers of the story are what you read for. And it's afterwards that I think to myself, like, wow, like it's so universal. Like you said, everybody knows somebody, everybody's heard a story, whether you've been impacted yourself or have a friend of a friend or whatever. It's universal. It really is a women. I mean, of course there are men who are victims of domestic abuse. So I'm not, but it's largely a woman's issue, and it's largely an issue that isn't spoken about publicly. And I think you're right. Unpeeling those layers and being like, who really should be ashamed here, and can people find a safe place to say, this is what's happening to me and I need help. And I think I'm hoping right now what we're doing is encouraging people to first read an incredible story about a network of people, not just women, but men too. And I want to talk about the doctor because I adore him. But also men who come together to help a person who can't find a way out. Not that they're weak. They're not weak. They're just stuck. They're very, very stuck, and they're in danger, and they need help. And we all, if we had blew a tire on the side of the road, we wouldn't somehow expect necessarily that we could fix that by ourselves. There's no shame in calling, for help, or if we're in an accident or whatever. So it's not at all parallel. But the point I'm trying to make in my own very inarticulate way is that this is a thing that people should be able to ask for help from, and they should know that there are safe places. And I would like to say that, I would be a safe place. And if somebody felt that they needed, resources, I would try to help in any way I could. I know very little, but I'm resourceful and smart and doggedly determined. And I imagine you feel the same. So I imagine there's lots of safe havens for people, and I probably made that so simplified. So I know that it's not at all that way. But
I think one of the other best novels I've read that again deals with this issue and it is part of the plot, but a very respectful and smart and thoughtful part of the plot is Dear Wife by Kimberly Bell.
Yes, exactly.
That really is the internal. So you're in the victim's head. She is on the run. She has this plan for how she's going to get away. Yeah. And it is so intense. You're on the edge of your seat, and she is very alone. However, she does meet these people along the way who are set up to, she even finds herself at a safe house where she has to say a certain thing at the front door. And I reached out to, actually, Kim Bell read this book early and endorsed it, which was amazing of her. But I had reached out to her and said how much I love Dear Wife. And it turned out that she also had a very personal reason for thinking about this issue. And one of the first things she said to me was, if you ever do any events that actually focus on, fiction about domestic violence or anything like that, please count me in. And so
Yeah.
I think often when you find a book that deals with the topic in a way that clearly is, clearly has done some work into what the actual psychology behind it is, often, the author does have a reason
Yeah.
for writing.
Yeah.
So
I think, and Kim's amazing. I adore her too. So, and you're right. That's another really gripping story, like The Last Caretaker. It really, you're not turning the pages because you're learning something about domestic violence. You're turning the pages because the story is really compulsive and fun. And then you're also thinking
but it's
about
ringing
things that,
true.
yeah,
Yeah.
it rings. Yeah, exactly. It rings true. And then let's talk about the doctor, because there is a doctor, of course, who is available in the network to come and help with if women are hurt,
Really
injured.
hurt. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, my dad was an OBGYN, and he's passed away now, but he also was this kind of person where women turned to him in times, not necessarily of scary domestic violence, although I'm sure, of course, that too, but just the fact that they had somebody to talk to who has this, who felt like somebody who would hold their their secrets and yet be a voice of reason. And I think that's there are, in the world of medicine changing so much, there aren't that many of those people available, because they have to get the patients in and out, and it's so much more complicated than it used to be. But I love that character, Dr. Clooney, he calls himself, which I thought was
his alias.
That's his alias. And I thought he was wonderful. And he said something about feeling like sometimes, in these situations, women, what they really crave is just some privacy and dignity. And that in a hospital, of course, you don't get privacy because somebody's in and out. And in much of this process, you don't necessarily get dignity, right? Because the system is set up to sort of shuffle people through, and not in a bad way, but we have a lot of people that need help, and the process can feel very, impersonal. And so I loved that comment from him. I thought that was, anyway, I thought that he was wonderful. And that's something you do incredibly well, is there are these little characters. Dottie's one. There's no spoilers, but there's a lot of little characters, the baker, where you get just a little bit of them, but you feel like they are so layered and real. And I love meeting characters like that on the page. I really do. So
It was
bravo.
really fun, kind of fun seems like maybe it
Yeah.
seems like the wrong word, but it's not. It was a lot of fun to try to dream up, who would be in this network and what their roles would be, and what kind of, in order to make this work, because, who all the steps along the way would be. And it did make sense that, of course, they'd have to have a doctor to call if someone shows very hurt. And I thought an OBGYN is someone who, probably his family is used to him getting buzzed in the middle of the night, having to leave.
Yeah.
So
very smart.
Just
right.
religious. But it was a lot of fun dreaming up all of the people. And I think the effect that it has on Katie, is they all kind of share a little bit of their story and why they're doing this. And it's like everybody has a reason being involved. Maybe some things happen. Maybe the OB had someone that he couldn't help in his practice, and now he is trying to kind of atone for that and help other people. And said, everybody has a really personal reason for being involved and for putting themselves at some sort of risk to be involved in helping people this way. Katie's the only one who doesn't. She just moved into this house. She's just there, and then I think it raises some interesting questions of, well, do you need and even the network is kind of like, well, she quickly, this is not a spoiler, she quickly gets involved on just kind of like a very temporary trial basis. Like, here, I will help. I don't want people to suffer because I'm not willing to do this, but like, you guys need to figure something else out.
Right.
I'll just kind of, I don't know.
I've got enough going on. Yeah,
exactly. And but it kind of raises these interesting questions of, should you need a personal reason to help, or just being like a good person
Right.
walking well, is that reason enough?
Right. Well, and I think Katie sees that woman and her, the woman's terror and all that, and it becomes personal very quickly, right? Because every woman has had that moment, and this is the quote that I chose to, you'll have to go back and watch that, everybody, on Instagram, because I do my weekly quotes on Mondays, most Mondays. And I chose a quote that was so, so poignant for me from this book, which is really about, like, there is universality in fear, and for women in particular, and marginalized groups, and I mean, just, and probably everybody to some extent, but there's the idea that we've all been in that place where we're like, we have that sort of sense of like something's not right. And so that is, for her, just, it triggers immediately the idea that, of course, I'm going to get involved, I'm going to help. Let's talk about Bess and Katie, because they're two so different, but such like longtime best friends, and yet there is a real tension between them, because Katie's now doing something that somewhat puts Bess. I mean, Bess is in charge of, this the caretaker position. I mean, she's the boss, and all of this network threatens to sort of jeopardize her, career. And so there's this tension of like, how much can Katie share? How, and how does that tension affect their friendship, which I thought was really powerful. And I'm curious to know sort of how that evolved for you.
Yeah, it was like Bess got her the job. Bess got her into this. And then,
Right.
Obviously Bess is the first person Katie calls, and she's like, what do you mean you didn't know
Right.
this was going on? How could you not know? And Bess is also sort of like, how could I not know? I thought I don't know what's happening here. And I think, she's got her own internal conflicts that she's going to need to work through, which I think is so interesting. I don't know why there's so many books that start with someone trying to start over.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about that we're all so fascinated by. Like, are we all secretly fantasizing about just chucking our lives and starting over? I don't think so. I'm not, but I think we all know how hard that would be. And I think everyone has moments where they think, oh, I'm just going to quit this job or quit this marriage, or whatever it is. And for Katie, the story opens for her in a place where she really is. A lot of times people say they want a fresh slate, but they're really just talking about one of these things, a marriage or a job or moving to a new place. She has done all of these things at once. Not only did her marriage not work out, but she and her ex-husband owned a business together.
Right.
And there was no way she could continue in that role. So she ended up sort of giving him the business. The business was very involved in their community in Pittsburgh. They were like a small business designing websites for all the small businesses around them. So she just out of this situation. She takes this job somewhere else, and Bess is the only person who she knows going in. And I think Katie's she doesn't want to be clingy. She doesn't want to show up, and she's like, just by getting her this job and a place to live, Bess has already done so much for her. So Katie really doesn't want to be a problem or a burden or clingy. I don't think Bess ever would have seen her that way. Katie could have called Bess 10 times a day, and Bess would have loved it. But Katie feels very, self-conscious about it. So it was, I think, for someone starting over, but to also have like this one existing relationship that she could lean on, that really doesn't want to, which also sort of ties into the theme of, relying on other people for help and trying to
and some shame, right? That it comes back to a little bit of shame.
Yes, she's got her own, and nothing about her marriage there was no, she doesn't have her own history. She wasn't
she wasn't a victim.
There was nothing like that. So I think it was an interesting place for her to be in, to sort of be grappling with this like external thing that's going on there as well.
Yeah, I thought it was, I mean, it's really, it's powerful. But again, I think it's to the question of like, do people want to start over? I think sometimes, and I'm in this position now, like I was married for 31 years and now I'm going through a divorce, and it isn't a choice of, do you want to start over? It's a situation where you're like, well, you have no choice.
Over.
Yeah, you have no choice but to start over. And that's where Katie is too. And I think there is such terror and glimmers of excitement, but really, I think we all imagine like what we would do if our whole world was pulled out from under us, and that is what happens to Katie. And like you said, and they talk about like what are the biggest stressors of life, right? It's like moving, job change, or losing your job, divorce, um, you know, death. I mean, it's just like, and she's basically going through like 5 of the 7 or whatever. I mean, it's really, and I think it's interesting to watch somebody whose world has been turned upside down. I think we're all interested in, what would I do if that happened to me? And I think that's what makes the story powerful.
And I think it also puts her in a unique position to relate to the people who are coming through. She has to have, some sense of, maybe awe is not the right word, but these are women who, once they go into this network, I
Yeah.
mean, hiding, they have decided to give everything up. They are running. They are
Yeah.
to assume new identities and become
Right.
someone else. And in order to
Right.
do that, you have to leave
Mhm.
everything behind. And so obviously their reasons and all of their surrounding factors are very different from hers, but they do have that in
Yeah.
common where they're really, willingness to,
Yeah.
whether they want to or not, with them also, not really a choice that they're
Mm-mm.
making to save their own lives, but not a choice that they wanted to have
Mm-mm.
to.
They did right. Nobody chooses that. Right. And it puts also into perspective her own existence, right? The safety of what she does have, like with Bess and her job, and she's and her sister. And so she's, I think sometimes, feeling like you're in a really, really hard position, it's helpful to see somebody and be like, okay, whoa, I have a lot of blessings that I am, that I can count on. Um,
Yes.
without, and also it's a really hard thing that we're each going through in our own existences. It's never easy. So and I wanted
Right.
to say congratulations that this was an Amazon first read, so
Thank
available to the world
you.
a whole month early. And I know it's already got a million fantastic reviews, which you're not supposed to be reading. We talked about
So
this beforehand too, because about the idea that you have a book that's due like in 3 weeks, and then a book that's out right now. And of course, any comment they make about the book that's out right now, you think, oh my God, am I doing that in this book? Which is
yeah.
so how we work, right? I mean, you were talking about a comment about something being wordy. And so what happened?
Yeah, I think a lot of readers think everything happens in a very segmented way. Like you release a book and then you promote that book, and then you write another book, and then you release it, and then you promote that. But I mean, we know usually the overlap is, you know, there's always a moment where you think, why did I do this to myself? Where I'm putting the finishing touches on one manuscript. But it's a good problem to have, right?
Yeah.
It's never
Right.
a given that there's going to be another book. So
Right.
it's just, grateful for the opportunity to be writing another one while also having the stress of the overlap at the same time. I do think, I don't know, it's interesting. You start to think about things that your books have in common. And The Last Caretaker is my 6th novel. The one I'm finishing now will be my 7th, I think, out next year. It doesn't have a release date yet. But I think I do like writing about people who are put to the test in a way where and I think with that you can draw on the good feedback and say, like, yes, this is kind of like, I don't know, this is just a theme that I can't get enough of, I guess. But I love reading
Yeah.
people who are gonna find out that they're stronger than they realize. And that's
Yeah.
something I'll do. That's something you're going through
That's
right
something,
now.
yeah, that's something we all have to face at one point or another. And I think we are stronger than we want to be. For one,
Yeah.
people say, oh, you're so strong, and you're like, well, I didn't really choose to be strong, right? It's something that you just have to do. But I do appreciate that, and I think that's a empowering thing to write about, because I think at some point or another we're all tested and stand in a way that we didn't expect to have to stand, whatever that test will be, a new job, a diagnosis, or there's just a million ways, right? So but anyway,
And just in
congratulations on
general,
that.
like in the big picture of things, this is, there's a lot of bad stuff going on in the world right now. Every time you
Mm,
open your
mm.
phone. It's just, I mean, the news is just really terrible, concerning, and there's a lot of
Right.
people out there who are, hurting and worried and,
Yeah.
very distraught by what's going on right now. And it feels like a strange time to be trying to promote a book. And it seems like there's always something in the news that makes you feel
Yeah.
like, it's not a time I want to be promoting a book. But if you are going to be promoting a book, at least it's a book about people trying to do the right thing, right?
Yeah. Right. And I think we write these books also for one, I think because we're working through something of our own always. I feel that way. But
Yeah.
also because these are an opportunity to leave the world just for a little time and be involved in a story that we know is going to have an ending that is, this is a deeply satisfying ending to the last caretaker. So, that's what we hope when we read a book is that we get something that takes away. We're not making the world right necessarily by reading this book, but we are giving ourselves a break from our own troubles and the troubles of the world just for a little time. And I think that's a gift we give ourselves, and a necessary gift, because we can't spend 24 hours a day inundated in all the hardship. It's we would all just crash. So I think that the power of the story is that ability to be, for a few hours somewhere else. And I love that. That is why I'm a writer. It's why I read as much as I read. It's the best gift. And I don't get that from television. I get it from being, in the pages of a book. So thank you for the
Me
break
too.
from the
Thank you.
really, yeah, from the really hard stuff that's in the world, and from, it's a thoughtful, wonderful story. And I really love Katie, and I love her relationships with the people around her, and the story, and there's so much goodness. So congratulations on an
Thank
incredible
you.
book, and thank you for joining us today. Tell everybody where they can find you. I know you're on I see you all the time on Instagram, and I'm sure you're on Facebook. Tell us where to find you.
Yes, I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Jessica Strawser author, and also my website, jessicastrawser.com. And December, I have a small tour. It's the holidays. It's a hard time of year to be going on
Yeah.
a book tour, but I do have some events around the Midwest where I live. I have an event in Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Cincinnati. So if anyone's in any of those cities, feel free to check out my event calendar on my website, and also a few virtual events where I'll be digging into this book as well too. So,
And if you're listening, Strawser is STRAW, like a straw you suck through, SER. So I had to ask, of course, how to pronounce it, which I oftentimes butcher them, but this one I happen to have gotten right, which is a huge success. So thank you again, Jessica, for joining us. This has been Killer Women with Jessica Strawser. We will see you next time. Bye.
having me.